Good evening and welcome again to Hudson Valley 6. Tonight our guest is former U.S. Congressman Joe DioGuardi. Tonight we'll talk to him about the budget battle in Washington and a host of other issues that affect the people in our area. Next on Hudson Valley 6.
This is Hudson Valley 6, a comprehensive look at the issues facing the Hudson Valley. Brought to you as a community service by U.S. Cablevision.
Welcome. Tonight our guest is former U.S. Congressman Joe DioGuardi. It's nice to have you here.
Nice to be here, Terry.
So much has gone on since you've been in Congress. So much has gone on since you last ran in the primary for Congress. I just want to ask you quickly, when you were in office, 1985 to 1989, you were the Congress, you were in the minority. Now the Republicans have the majority. Has anything changed?
Well, certainly nothing's changed about the budget. We're still fighting to get a balanced budget. Back in 1990 or 88, we were talking about the Graham-Rudman-Hollings bill. Now we're talking about the Republican Revolution. You might say that I helped begin that revolution because I worked closely with Gingrich and many other conservative Republicans as part of the Conservative Opportunity Society, and I'm delighted to see that we're finally getting a serious approach to the budget. But there's still a lot more that has to be done, and as a CPA, I see more into the numbers than most, and there's no question that we're still not using the right set of numbers, and that's a problem.
But how do you get that out when people say, okay, you start to do it, you're just beginning to do it, they start to cut things, they say, if you're going to let this debt rise, we're going to shut the government down, and the minute you do that, you have constituents all over crying, you're cutting me out, you're coming, and then you have politicians against you, you know, saying you're trying to hurt the poor, and then it fizzles out like it is now. The Republicans have basically, give or take, stepped away from what their original intent was.
Well, you know, Thomas Jefferson said it very well, Terry. He says, information is the currency of democracy. We've got to get more and more information to the people, and we've got to get them the right set of numbers, the right set of books. I think when they realize that we're imposing on the next generation, and this is not some amorphous concept, this is your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, if you're young enough, maybe your children. We're imposing a god-awful debt, and we keep talking about the $4.9 trillion. That's on the books. That's the bonded debt. What about the commitment for Social Security, Medicare, military pensions, civil service pensions, all these contingencies? You're talking about well over $20 trillion, and that's not even in the debate. Now, if the public knew this, they would at least say, well, let's get the current books balanced, even with the wrong numbers, and maybe we'll then explore these other concepts.
They want to do that, I think, but the thing is they're not able to convert to those large numbers, and what happens is the minute you try to do it, you have people on the other side saying that you're going to hurt the elderly, you're going to hurt the poor, you're going to hurt all that, and it becomes the message doesn't, people don't care about trillions if they feel they can't meet.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I wrote a book when I left Congress, and I entitled it Unaccountable Congress, It Doesn't Add Up, and the first chapter was entitled The Most Expensive Credit Card in the World, a Congressman's Voting Card. It's a little plastic card. And what I did is then put out a U.S. taxpayer credit card statement where I gave you your share of the national debt and your families. And then here's what the government bought for you, your share of defense, your share of Social Security, and your share of the interest on the national debt. You're right. It's important to personalize this. We haven't gotten there yet. But I think when the people realize that we have overspent much more than what government says they've spent, and that's why I named my foundation Truth in Government, because the public's not getting the truth. I think that they will be serious about then doing the right thing.
Now, when you say your foundation, you served in the United States Congress from 1995 to 1989.
No, 1985 to 89.
1985 to 1989. Did I say 95?
Yes.
Oh, it was just a mishap. 1985. Why did you not get reelected? You were in the 20th district, the first Republican in that district for years, right?
Well, you might say I ended up in the wrong district. It was a district that even attracted, guess who? Bella Rabzug, the lady with the hat. And that was my second race. As a matter of fact, people say that the reason I got into politics was that there was no Republican interested in running in that district in 1985. It was a district that was held by Representative Richard Ottinger for many years. A lot of redistricting has gone on, and in fact the race in 1994 is the district that we're in right now, includes about 40% of my old district, the upper part of Westchester County, and it was a very interesting race, as you remember, with 7 Republicans, but I was proud that I was able to win the conservative primary, come in second in the Republican primary, a very confused situation, and also attain, after a legal battle, the right to life line. So I was on 2 lines and almost got the third, and in this district, you must be on the Republican line. It is a very Republican district.
Let me ask you about that race, because I remember that race too, and it was a very interesting one. First off, Sue Kelly won that race, but there were 7 of you running. Let me just ask you in general terms, I don't want to get specific. How do you think she's doing?
Well, we're going to reserve that discussion to a later show, because I think it's important. She's right now our representative, but there are many people that are telling me to jump in this race. And in the last year, I've gone around this community from Dutchess all the way down to Westchester. I've looked at the problems that people have locally. We've got a couple of environmental problems here with a tree stump dump right here on 52, and we got one in Croton. I'm working on those right now. But I'm meeting with, as we speak, the Republican and conservative leaders all over these 4 counties. We've got all of Putnam County, about half of Westchester, about 2/3 of Dutchess, and a small piece of Orange. And I'm finding out that they're not all very happy with what is going on right now. So what I did as of the end of last year...
When you say not going on right now, I don't mean to pin you down, but I want to ask you, do you mean not going on in general, or not going on with U.S. Congresswoman Kelly's voting record?
Both. Obviously, there are many votes that have been cast right now, and people see things differently depending upon what their party is. But I believe that my philosophy, my voting record from the past, and what I said in the last race, and what I will say in all the races or all debates that we'll have if I decide to officially jump in, and we're getting close to that, I think you'll see that I come much closer to the people in this district than the current representative.
Okay. In that race, I think both of you would say that you're fiscally conservative. I know that she's fought real hard for Newt Gingrich's budget, and she's been part of the revolution for sure in terms of the budget out there. She's been fighting and taking hits.
So did I. I was there making this whole revolution.
No doubt about that.
Back in 1985.
I'm sure you have. I don't even question that. I'm just saying right now, I know that she's been out there fighting. You're both fiscally conservative. On social issues, there's a big gap, correct?
I would say so, yes.
Can you elaborate on where you think the breakdown is?
Let's talk about Newt Gingrich, because I noticed recently she gave an interview at the North County press, and apparently because now the Democrats are saying she's vulnerable, she came out very quickly to say, well, I didn't vote with Newt Gingrich. In fact, I voted against Newt Gingrich most of the time. Now, this is interesting for someone who's saying that they're a fiscal conservative. But let's take a look at the record, because I've been following that record, and where I miss it sometimes, I get calls from people to say, did you see that vote? During the summer, the most important vote that Newt Gingrich needed was the HHS, that's the House, Health and Human Services Appropriations Bill. It only passed by 1 vote, 219. She did not vote for that. And this is kind of the welfare reform bill. I thought that was very important, and yet she didn't vote for that. So I would say that that is is something that we've got to explore. Also, she's only one of 2 Republicans to vote against the ban on partial birth abortions. I mean, this is a horrible procedure. I mean, literally, a late-term abortion, a breathing baby. In fact, the nurse who was pro-choice, who's now pro-life, who described the procedure for most to hear on Cablevision, or I guess it was CNN, said that basically the baby's alive, the feet are there, but they don't pull the head out because then it would be murder. So while the baby is still in the womb, at least the head, they then do something horrible like put an instrument into the back of the head. It's so terrible, it defies belief how anyone could vote for that. So it seems to me that we need a little bit more description as to why someone would vote for that procedure.
Well, I know that Sue Kelly did, and she says that she got a lot of backing from NARAL in this race, the Republican primary race in 1994.
You don't have to go way off the reservation. I mean, you're talking about something that is so egregious. You're talking about a late-term abortion, probably a sex selection, and is that the kind of, that's not pro-choice anymore. You're talking about pro-abortion at that point, and that's not right.
We're talking with former U.S. Congressman Joe DioGuardi. You were talking about some of the votes that Sue Kelly made that really you felt do not represent the people in this district, and you were talking about the partial birth abortion. But when you get down to running against an incumbent congressperson, do you think that you're going to get support from the Republican Party or from Newt Gingrich or anyone else to try to cut that up and then possibly get someone from the other party elected?
You've heard this before, Terry. Politics is local. What does Newt Gingrich have to do with this race? What you have to
Money
do,
is one thing?
perhaps, but what you have to do, if you want to represent the people in this district, is you have to visit the community groups in this district, the political leaders in the Conservative Party, the Republican Party. You've got to get around to see how they feel about you, how they feel about the current incumbent, and then you make your decision. What happens in Washington, except for the voting record, is a distant second, third, and fourth to what the people who are in these communities feel about me and feel about the incumbent.
When we go back to that race in 1994, it was interesting because everybody was saying, even though Ham Fish's son was running as the Democrat, everyone was saying it didn't matter who got elected in the Republican primary because then State Senator Pataki, now Governor Pataki's whole voting district fell within the 19th district, that they were going to come out in hordes and vote and do coattails, and that whoever won the Republican primary was going to win the
That's
race.
what happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you say that you've never had a runoff between the two of you, what do you mean by that?
Well, New York is one of the few states that doesn't have a runoff in the primary, so you could have an anomaly like we had. We had 7 candidates, and the incumbent won by 23%, and then I had about 20, and then we had Paul Booker, Glenn Warren. I guess Glenn Warren was third. And so on. So there was very few votes separating the first 3 or 4. In most states, what happens at that point is they have another election a week or 2 away where the 2 top vote getters then go against each other, and then you have a real referendum on who the nominee should be. Well, that didn't happen in this district.
Let me ask you something about Republican politics in New York. You had 7 people running. Now, if you had a philosophy of government and an ideology which was similar to Glenn Warren's, I know that it is, and to some other people running, but more, I'd say more so to Glenn Warren. Between the two of you then, if you're telling me you're second and he's third, there are people say he was second and you were third, but that's another issue.
Well, overall, I was second.
Yeah,
but in Dutchess County, he ran away with it. In fact, he almost won the race in Dutchess County.
I know. But very
well respected up here, by the way.
Actually, they say that he actually won the whole race, but those are the numbers. I mean, he came in second with everyone, but those numbers, that's a moot point now.
Right.
The two of you, what happens to the egos of men? And I don't mean this negatively, where did you both think you were just so much the best candidate? Because if you had come together, there wouldn't have been a race, because the voters of those 2 people probably would have voted in one block.
There's no question that he did very, very well in Dutchess County. I did very, very well in Westchester, where I was known, and in Putnam. It's unfortunate that we didn't have the time to come together. Don't forget how this race came to be. Ham Fish got ill and decided to retire about 3 or 4 months before the primary. I was one of the last ones in the race. So we already had several that announced against Ham Fish at that point. So what you had was very little time for us to kind of get together with the parties. And not one party now, you had 4 counties. So therefore you're dealing with the leaders in 4 counties to say, now, let's have a series of debates, let's have a series of forums, and let the leaders choose. Let there be a caucus of the 4 counties and choose the nominee. We couldn't do that. So literally what happened was 7 individuals, and by the way, this is American, competition, ideas, 7 individuals decided, let me make my case directly to the people. Right. We had to get signatures. We had to go meet a lot of people. We tried to get the political leaders on our sides because each one of us went to the convention in each of the 4 counties. But what happened was, and this favored obviously the incumbent, the conservative men split the vote. And certainly Glenn Warren and I, split it very nicely, so she was able to come right through the middle and win the primary with 23% in a district that is overwhelmingly Republican and conservative, and in a district where, as you said, Pataki represented.
Yeah. One more question on this, and then we'll move on to some other things I know that are interesting you a lot. Paul Buca actually established residence here to run in that race, right? He wasn't even a local resident, and he got a sizable chunk of the votes. I think he came in 4th in the race.
He did.
How does that work? You just establish residency a month before, and then you're in the race?
Well, legally, if you want to believe this or not, I found out that you don't technically have to have a residence in a district that you're running, but politically it doesn't work. You need to live where your constituents are.
How did he get so many votes in a district where he wasn't even living there?
Well, I understand he was. I understand he was. I understand that, don't forget, he went to West Point.
Yeah.
And by the way, Paul's a good friend, and he's currently the president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Association.
He was a good friend, but he also ran against you, right?
Well, I didn't know Paul until that race, believe it or not.
that.
But we're good friends, and we work together, and hopefully he'll come out. And we haven't sat down, but I think he would lean more in my philosophical direction than the incumbents. But Paul, I believe, was part of the district. But let me say this. I was part of the district. Don't forget, I represented this district for 4 years, or at least a good part of it, about 40%. I think if you make your case to the people, and people want to say, well, why is there so much money needed in politics? Well, how do you get your message across? Paul did spend a lot of money. As I recall, he spent more than any one of us, and he has a very good record as a hero, as a business person. And he got his message out and got a lot of votes. Unfortunately, not enough to win.
It was a tough campaign. I know they used a lot of commercials that actually were negative. And usually you don't see that.
Unfortunately.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate. I don't want to make a commentary on that. I know that I see it on every level, but I know that on a local level, you usually don't see it as much. It was a very, very tough campaign. I know that. But you didn't shut down your offices after that. You've still kept your offices open in Ossining. What was the purpose of that?
I did the same thing after 1989, waiting for the redistricting, but little did I know that my old district would go in great part to Queens, because the then incumbent Democrat benefited from the fact that Albany was controlled by Governor Cuomo and the state assembly, and in effect there was an incumbency protection plan that worked against me, and that now forced me to look at the other part of my district that was not put in the lower part, and that's the part that's now in the 19th Congressional District. And it's a great district. But it seems to me that I'm where I want to be. This is where the constituents are that I represented in great part. And hopefully what I'll do is continue. And what I did after the race in '89 was open up an office, Truth in Government, became a human rights activist. That was the Albanian American Civic League. You might say Albanian. Well, these are the people who are oppressed in the Balkans. And what's gone on in Bosnia with that Dayton Agreement, it's a failed peace agreement that may result in another big problem to the people of the Southern Balkans, and there are 7 million Albanians there, and they found out about me while I was in Congress, and I became a volunteer human rights activist for them. So you may say what I did exactly after 1989. I continued my activities after the '94 race in Ossining on those two issues.
And how do you finance these ongoing things that you have?
Well, since I'm a volunteer, I don't get paid. But what we do is we make our case to people around America who are interested in these things, whether it's the fiscal responsibility, that's Truth in Government, or the human rights issue, and they make charitable contributions so that I can get to Washington, make speeches, do publications. We've put out the book Unaccountable Congress, by the way. It's not owned by me. I didn't get the royalties. It's owned by the foundation. So the royalties were used to reprint the book to give out to universities.
Before we go into the next break, and we have a little time here, could you give us like one example in layman's terms so we understand some of the ways that the Congress manipulates numbers so that they're not really representing what's going on there to the American people in terms of just fixing numbers to say we're at a balanced budget when they're really not?
Well, I wrote a book on it, so it's very difficult to summarize, but let me give you two quick ones. The Unaccountable Congress. It doesn't add up. The one that's most egregious is this, Terry. The government imposes on you and your family and your business a system that it doesn't impose on itself. If you were an officer of a publicly traded corporation and you issued stock or debt, and we see the government issuing bonds all the time, you'd be indicted, convicted, and arrested for securities fraud if you used the accounting system, the cash basis of accounting that the government uses. Now, you could use a cash basis for your checkbook like I do, but on an entity that has a throughput of $1.5 trillion this year, you need to have what they call generally accepted accounting principles and an independent audit, maybe a capital budget. None of that's to be found. So the government, there's a double standard here, is imposing on you and the business sector a system it doesn't impose on itself. And what they do is they manipulate the bottom line on the cash basis by accelerating income, deferring expenses, and that's fraud.
We have about 5 minutes left here in the show. What do you think, with all the politics that are going on and everybody trying to get the upper hand, the president's running for re-election in November, all the House seats are up, I mean, the Senate seats, there's a number of Senate seats up, governors. What do you think it's going to break down like? Is it too early to tell, or do you feel that the Republican revolution is going to continue, or is it going to fizzle?
Well, you're going to have another confusing presidential race, I can tell you that. I mean, isn't it amazing to see Bill Clinton in the State of the Union message sounding like a Republican? He's co-opting all the Republicans.
He very much moved to the right. There's no question about that.
Well, certainly much more to the center, because he was implementing. The way he walks is very much to the left. The way he talks is very much to the center and the right. I think what you're going to find, unfortunately, but maybe for the American people, it's a good thing to have